you know, as I went through this next chapter, which, you know, when you say, okay, the departure from Egypt, well, what the heck does that have to do with what we're going through today? So at the beginning of that particular chapter, what Bob talks about is the archetypal stories and images, the myths, the legends, the things that we carry around in us. He talks about how you know, while, and this is going back to Jungian archetypes, but that essentially archetypes are like the organs of the brain. They're things that we carry with us that mean certain things, teach us certain things, and give us the ability to respond in certain situations in instinctive ways, the same way that animals, you know, grow up and can instinctively figure out how to hunt, how to build a nest, how to take care of their young, and, you know, all the things that they're born with. We also are born with things. And some of those things are eventually drawn from us in the form of myth and legend and story. And so what Bob says is the biblical story of Exodus lies within the collective memory of the Judeo-Christian culture. And as such, it's more than a historical account of a certain tribe of people. It is a story that lives within each of us. And you say, well, you know, what does that really? I mean, what does the Israeli tribe leaving slavery in Egypt have to do with me? I'm not following you maybe necessarily here, Bob. Why is that a part of my subconscious? So there are a lot of really deep pieces to this. And one of the things that he talks about is the process of journeying and how that is transformative for us as people. And it's something that he rightly points out, we're starting to lose this power or this ability because everything is so instant now. You know, before, if you wanted to, you know, back in ancient times, right? If you wanted to go someplace, it could take you 40 years to get, you know, to take a 2-week walk across the desert, which is essentially, if you look at the distance on the map that the Israelites covered from Egypt to the Promised Land, I mean, really, if you knew which way you were going and you walked that way, you know, in about 2 weeks you'd be there. 40 years obviously is a representative number that simply means as long as it took, right, metaphysically. But now, right, if we wanted to make that jump, well, we could climb in a chopper and be there in a few minutes. You know, everything is instant now. It's fast, fast, fast. We are losing our span of attention, and what we are also losing is what happens during those journeys, that time along the way. You know, back in the 50s, the beat poets and people like Hunter S. Thompson, you know, talked about the things that happened on the road. There even used to be a TV show, On the Road with Charles Kuralt, right? So what Bob says is that the transforming power of the transition process lies not in our arrival at a certain destination, but in our experience of the process itself. It's extremely experiential. I mean, I know for me, like the process of sobriety, it's not just I quit drinking, right? There's this experience that had to happen to me over time. And it's funny, in in the 12 steps, we have this saying, time takes time. Right? Well, journeying takes time. So Bob goes on to say, when journeying, however, the journey itself is as important as the arrival at a destination. We are so changed by the journey itself that we arrive as a different person than when we departed. I have a picture here, if you can't see it, of Bilbo, right? Bilbo Baggins. And he is another example of that classic archetype of someone who undergoes a journey and is transformed by the journey as much as anything that, any individual thing that happens or where he got to, right? His journey changed who he was profoundly and permanently. But one thing that we have to remember is that even that story of, the escape from bondage, or, Bilbo's story certainly has a past, right? It didn't just start like, a lot of us think, oh yeah, well, the Israelites were all slaves in Egypt. Well, they didn't start out that way. Okay. Something happened that put them into bondage. And that's a real learning piece that we can say, oh, hey, how does that parallel, my life or our life as a nation, the situations that we've gotten ourselves into, right? How did I get into this pickle that I'm in? Right? So Bob says the story begins with the Israelites living as slaves in the land of Egypt. They're in bondage to their Egyptian overlords, but it didn't begin that way. The Israelites originally settled in Egypt in response to a crisis about 400 years earlier. And then this quotes from Genesis. It says, there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt, there was bread. All right. So, they'd been having a really tough time, but hey, the Egyptians still had stuff to eat. So they went there and said, hey, can we hang with you guys for a while? And the Egyptians were like, yeah, sure. Come on in. We got plenty. Now, it's funny. I have a picture of an assembly line of some, probably 1930s or 1940s model automobiles. And what this is representative of is that time in our history as a nation when we kind of made ourselves into part of the industrial machine. There was a point in American life when so many of us were a little more self-sufficient. And I even think about like my grandmother, who was born around the turn of the last century. And, was a parent in deep West Virginia during the Great Depression, right? So, my grandmother was a school teacher by profession, and she was retired by the time, and maybe just teaching, substitute teaching when I was a little boy. But, she did a lot of things for herself that we simply do not think of doing now. At the level of, making bread and rolls, or going out and picking blackberries and making her own jam, sewing her own clothes. Almost every piece of clothing in her closet, she created herself. People were much more self-sufficient. But what happened, as the industrial age kind of went on, and especially post-depression, right, is people started working in, more and more in factories. People started specializing more and more. People became more and more dependent on their employers, on the, kind of the way the whole thing gets tied together. And people also began banding together and unionizing. And, like the United Auto Workers Union back when I was a kid was a hugely powerful group. Not so much today, but back then they really were. Well, what happens? Same things, the same thing that happened to the Israelites in Egypt. That which saves us can imprison us. Now, I'm just going to read this to you. This is from Exodus chapter 1, and this is verses 8 through 14. So for a few hundred years, the Israelites have been living in Egypt. They've been getting along, everything's okay, right? Everybody's got enough to eat. Everybody's doing fine. But then this happens. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And if you remember, Joseph was the kid who was sold into slavery in Egypt. And he kind of rose up in power and became an advisor to the king. So now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, look, The Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. You know, and I have a picture here of some workers on strike. You know, so it's funny as you see in our recent past as Americans. Okay, so the industrial age came about. Now, prior to that, you know, what you had was a whole lot of people who didn't have much, right? There was a fairly large lower class in America, and there were some really wealthy people. Middle class was not huge. Well, after the Great Depression, with industrialization and the advent, you know, real unionization, and also, you know, we could go into tax policies, but I suppose I shouldn't be talking about those in church. Anyway, the middle class becomes more and more prevalent. We get to the 1970s, and President Reagan basically guts the unions. Basically, the Egyptians, the people who were caught up in money consciousness as opposed to people consciousness, you know, the ego self-driven people decided, hey, these people have too much. You know, they're moving along, they're making money, and you know, they're going to be too powerful. We can't have that. So we need to take away their money and their power. And because people had become dependent upon their employers, they began abandoning those, you know, the unions and the groups that made them powerful and looking out for themselves. Most of you are probably too young to remember this, but I remember when Time magazine, the cover of it, this is back during the 70s, right? And it came out with a cover and it called the 70s the me decade. And this was a big shift from the 60s when things were about collective action, right? You know, it's like people went from drinking wine and smoking grass and everybody being together to, you know, doing coke and keeping it to themselves, and it's all about me, 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 me. And you know, Gordon Gekko became a hero. Greed is good, you know, actually made it into the lexicon. And so we began to splinter, and those things that bound us together began to fall apart. So we ask ourselves, how does this happen? And how do we turn into people? How do we turn into Egyptians? You know, because the thing is, when I talk about the Egyptians and the Israelites, okay, this has nothing to do with races or nationalism or any of that stuff. This is entirely metaphysically representative. Okay, so in the story, the Egyptians, they represent that physical realm manifestation. You know, it's all about wealth, it's about property, it's about power. Whereas the Israelites represent that part of us, that spiritual part of us that longs after God. All right. And anybody, and it doesn't matter, you know, where you're born or how you're born or who you're born to, anybody can be an Egyptian and anybody can be an Israelite. And you can go back and forth, right? It depends on what happens to you. It depends on your journey. So when we say, well, how did that happen? Bob answers that. He says, as children, we adapted ourselves to the needs and desires of our family in order to get our own needs met, right? You know, mom and dad tell you to do this. Well, if you don't want to get spanked and you want to get dessert, you do what mom and dad tell you to do, right? Most of us. Some of us have really stubborn kids that are like, yeah, the heck with you, dad. But for the most part, kids figure out how to adapt to survive. So he says, we formed beliefs, attitudes, and behavior patterns that may have served us well in our childhood. 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years later, however, these same patterns may enslave us and make our life bitter because the circumstances of our life are vastly different. The patterns of thinking, feeling, and behavior that once existed to serve and to protect us may now keep us in bondage. The Israelites' bondage in Egypt is symbolic of this condition of becoming a prisoner of our past. And for you on the phone, Haley, I have a picture of a couple of little kids. I mean, one of them's probably 4 and the other one's probably 5 or so. And they're given this kind of Nazi salute, and the little kid's wearing a white power t-shirt with a swastika on it. And you can see a guy who is probably her dad, standing behind them and kind of egging them on. We inherit these ideas that hold us in bondage very often from our families of origin, or maybe from the religious body of our origin, whatever it was that influenced us as children. So then what happens to lead us out of bondage? And I'm sure I could get in trouble if this particular slide got out, because I've got a picture of Barack Obama and Donald Trump on it, right? So here's the quote from Bob. The leader of the Exodus was a man named Moses. The story of Moses' birth follows the motif of the divine child archetype. This represents the fresh, innocent, creative expression of the true self. The Pharaoh within us, the ego, seeks to destroy this new life. Boy, do these two ever represent kind of that idea expressed in our national identity. Back when Barack Obama first spoke at, I forget whether it was the 2000 or 2004 Democratic Convention, he seemed like this, like it says here, a fresh, innocent, creative expression of what America was all about, and when we got into his campaign and he kept saying, yes, we can. Boy, has there ever been a more American phrase than yes, we can. That's like manifest destiny in 3 words, 3 little words, right? Yes, we can. That whole idea. But it was not just the traditional we. The traditional we was basically white guys and whoever we liked, right? If we're being honest, and that's coming from a white guy. Okay. When Barack Obama said, yes, we can, his we was a much different we. It was a bigger we, and it included people of color. It included people in the LGBTQ community. It included the marginalized in all kinds of ways. It included people who are disabled or who have healthcare concerns. It included, the whole 9 yards. With the possible exception of those people who did not want to be included in that we, because they were the people who had been we before. They were the privileged, right? And for some reason, people tend to look at privilege like pie. There's just not enough for everybody, so I'm going to need it for myself. So then the Pharaoh within us seeks to destroy that thing. Well, what happened when the person who represented the privileged white shows up? Did everything to undo what the person representing. It's crazy. I mean, I know some people would really, probably have their head spin around and pop off if they heard that I was, comparing Barack Obama to Moses or Donald Trump to Pharaoh. But these stories, they're archetypal because they express universal themes that happen over and over and over again in human experience until we learn the lesson and we come out of the story on the other side. So one of the lessons that, is taught in Exodus in this chapter is that you cannot escape your past. And the way it's taught in the story is out of anger, Moses killed an Egyptian and tried to bury the body. he discovered that he'd been seen and was forced to flee Egypt. Bob notices that we too may have tried to bury the past, but ultimately all secrets will be discovered. And when this happens, it may precipitate a transition for us as well. And the image that I have here is of the apocalypse of settler colonialism. You know, and the thing that we as white people, right, have been burying as part of our American past is the way that we treated people of color, the way that we treated the natives when we showed up, the way that we treated the Africans that we kidnapped, you know, and brought across the ocean in horrifying conditions and then enslaved on these shores. And, you know, I could also get into things like child labor and all the other things that that capitalism and the wealthy have attempted to do in order to make themselves richer and richer. Many of which we have been able to get rid of by everything from the Civil War to joining together and demanding civil rights. And so many of our friends and neighbors and relatives, you know, especially this Thanksgiving, if you are with a big family, God bless you, right? And if you need me, call me. You know, if you just want to vent for a while, give me a call. Okay, that's fine. Right? But those people are all going to want to bury the past. They're going to want to bury the past 4 years. They're going to want to pretend they didn't vote for Donald, or else they're going to want to, you know, explain to you why it was still a really great idea to support that person. And you know, and then they'll go off on riffs on why there is no such thing as systemic racism in America, and there was no genocide against the Indians, and you know, there is no such thing as white privilege. You know, but we can't bury the past, right? Ultimately, it's gonna come out. It's coming out now, and it's really causing a lot of cognitive dissonance for some people. You know, so hopefully it will precipitate a transition that moves us into a place of consciousness where we're willing to take a look at what's happened and say, okay, we got to make that right. You know, I mean, I'm a student of this, right? As a student of the 12 steps, you know, the 9th step says that we're going to track down the people that we have harmed, and we're going to make amends to those people. Okay. As opposed to going into denial about the fact that we need to make any amends at all. Oh, no. We're going to own that stuff. And we're not just only going to reach out to people. We're going to say, and what do I need to do to make this right? And I got to tell you, it is the most liberating thing in the world to do that. And I genuinely wish that those people who are still caught up in that Egyptian mindset, you know, I wish they could have that. And I hope they do before they die. This is another one that's going to make people's heads spin around, right? So in terms of reminding us who we really are. So, you know, Moses has basically, he's kind of been trying to avoid doing what God's asking him to do. First, he ran off, you know, when he got caught murdering that Egyptian. But even when he's supposed to be leading people to the promised land, he's talking to God saying, listen, I don't think I'm prepared for this. I'm not really good at talking and stuff, you know? So the Lord, you know, and the translation that we get, and there's various translations of how this happens when Moses asks God, okay, so who are you? When I go back and they say, who told you to tell us this? What am I supposed to say? And, you know, probably the best translation is, I am that I am. Right? I am that I am. So the Lord, I am that I am, appeared to Moses and told him that he was to lead his people out of Egypt to the promised land. Moses eventually and very reluctantly agreed. It is the Lord of our being who leads us out of our bondage. If we are identified with the personal self, the little s self, as was Moses, we too may feel inadequate to the task. And I have a picture here of Bernie, and he's standing with Liz Warren and a bunch of other folks. And Bernie to me is kind of like that voice who demands that we go further than we think we're going to be able to. You know, he pushes us to be the kind of human beings that well, frankly, that Jesus called us to be. You know, to take care of each other, right? Instead of, you know, demanding more for ourselves, you know, how can we take care of those people who are disenfranchised, who are marginalized, the people who are hurting, the people who have less? You know, he's made his career about that, and, you know, about doing the difficult things, not the easy things, not the low-hanging fruit, right? You know, he says, we really need to go all the way to take care of people. It's like, you know, God didn't tell Moses, you need to move to the suburbs, right? He's like, no, you got to leave Egypt. You got to go. You got to go all the way to the promised land. There's going to be a time coming up when people in our nation are going to suggest all we need to do is move to the suburbs. And I think what we need to do is to demand that we keep walking through the desert till we get to the promised land. It may not be popular. You know, Moses had issues. Moses had problems. You know, there was the whole thing with the people saying, hey, I don't want to follow this guy. Let's all, you know, take our earrings and make a golden calf. In some ways, I think we kind of been through that period. But what we need to do is keep our eyes on the prize, on that higher goal, and not simply say, oh, you know what, God, haven't I gotten them far enough? I mean, we're out of Egypt. I mean, it's a little better. A little better doesn't take care of everyone. When I read this again, it just blew me away. Okay. This is Bob. I'm quoting him from the book. Egypt represents the unawakened life ruled by external conditions. Pharaoh, who was the ruler of this world, represents the personal ego. As with Pharaoh, often it is only after we are plagued with great suffering that the ego relinquishes control and we can hear the voice of the Lord, the I am. My jaw just about hit the floor when I read that again, new this time. It's literally what we've been going through and literally what is happening right now in this country. You know, so many people in this country are still caught in that unawakened life ruled by external conditions. All they care about is what they can see. You know, did I get my money? Do I have my stuff? Am I being taken care of? And Pharaoh, the ruler of this world who represents the personal ego, oh my God. And then getting hit with a plague, being plagued with great suffering. So until the ego relinquishes control, I'm almost speechless. Again, these are archetypal stories for a reason because they happen over and over and over again. Okay, so here's the warning. This is kind of for the next, few weeks, months. I know that we've been celebrating. I've been celebrating. We all have. And it's like, oh my God, thank you. All right. But then remember this piece of the story. All right. So if you remember the story, Pharaoh's kind of like, I'm fed up. I'm done. Y'all get out of here. Okay. And then when they were almost out of Egypt, he's like, you know what? Nah, I'm not going to let that happen. And he sends his legions after the fleeing Israelites. So Bob says, Pharaoh changed his mind and pursued the children of Israel. The old reality, this is key, the old reality is not easily forgotten. Just when we think we finally let go, here it comes again. Caught between memories of a past now gone and an uncertain future, we may feel anxiety and regret. And I have a picture of some of Donald Trump's supporters out there protesting against his losing the election. Over the next few months, well, honestly, for quite some time, we're going to be dealing again with people who insist on hanging on to the old reality, the old paradigm, the old idea that the only thing that matters is me and my stuff. The only thing that matters is me taking care of my family so that I make enough money. The heck with you and any of your people. It's all about me and my people, what I can see, what I can touch, what I can bring inside my fence, inside my house, inside the range of my guns. When that world gets threatened, when the very idea of, wait a minute, it's not about me and mine, it's about us. It's about everyone. So when things begin to happen that create that reality, there becomes a huge amount of fear and a huge amount of cognitive dissonance. The past 4 years have essentially been an expression of that fear of change. The 8 years prior to that, it was very much about the change. Past 4 years have been blowback. Well, we're now seeing, the wave is starting to move again. And we're again saying, no, you know what? Black lives matter. Gay lives matter. Trans lives matter. The kids in cages matter. There are going to be people pushing back. I mean, the fact that 70 million people voted to keep the same president in office should serve as a warning to us that the Pharaoh is still around, and that as we attempt to escape from Egypt, they're going to be coming for us. We can't live in fear, but what we have to do is be prepared, right? And this is the hard part. I know that so many of us want to simply say, hey, if you voted for Donald Trump, I am done with you. There are a lot of reasons people may have done that. Fear of change is one of them. And there can be some fairly decent human beings that are simply afraid. There's some evil people as well. And what we have to be able to do is open our hearts to those people who are willing to step across the line. I'm reminded of the story of Pickett's charge during the Civil War, right? And General Pickett's regiment is charging the Union lines. They got decimated. I mean, they were just getting it handed to them. And right as the guys in front were up against the Union battlements, right? I mean, they've been fighting and shooting at each other the whole way, but they're getting massacred. And the Union guys know it. They know these guys are dying. There were Union soldiers literally reaching their hands across the battlement to the Confederates saying, come across and live. And it's crazy that we're still fighting the same war. I think we need to keep our hearts open enough for people that we are willing to reach our hand out across the battlement and say to them, come with us and live. It's going to be hard, and they're going to be fighting us the whole way up. But it's important to keep that much good in our hearts. So what Bob says the solution is it's given in the story. He says this is a very powerful lesson, and it consists of two parts. First, stand firm in knowing that the Lord, the I am of us, will work for us today, and then steps forward in faith and courage. And Haley, I have a picture here of the new flag in Mississippi. And, it's funny that we're talking about having faith in the Lord. And it actually, the new flag actually says, "In God we trust" on it, which upsets some of my agnostic and atheist friends. But it's interesting. They got rid of the flag that has the Confederate stars and bars on it, right? And now they have a picture of a flower surrounded by stars, and it's against a big blue field. And then it has some yellow bars and some red bars. So it has both red and blue in it. But
it's a magnolia, right?
It's a magnolia. It's the magnolia state, right?
That's a state flower.
Yeah, but it's a much more hopeful image, and yet still says, "In God we trust." And I think that's a nice little symbol for what Bob was talking about. Standing firm and knowing that the Lord will work for you today, and then stepping forward in faith and courage. And then finally, he says the Exodus story is an archetypal portrayal of endings. Like the children of Israel, we too may outgrow our circumstances, and we too may need an internal Moses to lead us out of our old life. Always the Lord is there guiding us toward freedom. And I have a picture, Haley, of the Statue of Liberty standing in the fog, and you can still make out the statue. And I was reminded of that. I lift my lamp, from the Emma Lazarus poem. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. That's who I think we all would like America to be. We would like for America to be that place that people feel relief and joy when they see that image, that statue, that welcome, like, yes, this is a good place and you're welcome here. It does our hearts good to believe that about this country that we're from. But as we've seen, this country is not necessarily what we thought it was. And it's up to us to make it what we hope that it can be. And the way that we do that is we leave the Egypt of our consciousness, that consciousness of the physical world, of the consciousness of gold and blood behind. And we become part of the consciousness that the Israelites represent, that thing that moves towards God, and which Jesus ended up calling a kingdom of God, a place where everyone has enough and nobody needs to be afraid.